Hello everyone, welcome to the Outward podcast. I'm your hostess, Jenny Danielsson in Stockholm, Sweden. Today I am joined by the fabulous Norwegian artist Constance Tenvik. She picks up the phone at her studio in Oslo and we will talk about the use of narration within her art practice. You do so many different things. You draw, you paint, you make sculptures and all that. And sometimes when talking about what an artist does, it's described as a practice. How do you feel about that expression?
Yeah, I think that's a good word. I mean, it's funny too because oftentimes, at least I will be practicing stuff I don't know how to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like in the last production, I went from working with a small team for the video to suddenly having like 2 film photographers and having to direct 14 people or something like that. And then suddenly I was a director, for one day. And before that, I've usually staged myself and I've been alone in a room. So it's funny how, I might repeat myself on some level when it comes to, for example, drawing. Like, that really is something I just do every day. And it's like a steady continuum or something. But then when it comes to certain other things, it's this other force that makes me jump in headfirst into stuff that's really new.
Mm.
And maybe that's where, narrative comes in, too. That narratives might help me dare to jump, if that makes sense.
It does, actually. But can you describe how you use narration within your practice?
Yeah. I think it has a little bit to do with my interest in details, honestly. Because, if I'm having a nice moment with a friend, I might want to remember that moment and I'll think about all of the details, like everything on the table, everything, and then I'll draw everything. And then when I look back at a drawing, it has a little bit of a story, maybe because of the details. And I think also in stories, what hooks me in is oftentimes these images that just stick in my head and that I can't shake out of my head. And usually I do something about them. So let's say with Gesamtkunst with myself, right?
Mm-hmm.
The show you saw in Stockholm.
Yeah.
It started out with thinking about Tristan and Isolde, and I think there were some things in my own life probably that I wanted to figure out. I was thinking a lot about how love can trap you and how Isolde in that story is completely bound and trapped by all of the male relationships she's in.
Yeah, very much so.
And it was also funny, because I started out just reading and also just making mood boards and mind maps and trying to establish all of my interests within this medieval tale. But then eventually, for example, an interest grew in the character Morold, this ghost that kind of sets the premise for the tension within the whole story. And then eventually, even if he's just a ghost, he's just a tiny part in the real story. He became kind of a main character almost. For me, it was like this mystery to me. And then he became the one in the performance in the opening too. So I think maybe as an artist, I have this freedom to play within these narratives and to use them however I want. And they can become objects or drawings or videos or performances. And maybe I think one thing I've done maybe since I was little was to maybe sometimes get obsessed with the wrong things. Or I would, if in a history lesson or something, I would maybe really think about one little detail that maybe, in order to tell a story of a war wouldn't be the right way of telling the story. But within art, you are allowed to zoom in on what captures you or what makes you imagine stuff, right? Yeah.
I mean, I would say that, human beings has since the dawn of time been interested in stories and telling stories. And one way of doing that has always been to make imagery one way or the other.
Yeah.
I think it's completely ingrained in who we are. And of course, detail is very important there as well.
Yeah, completely.
But do you do your artworks always tell a story?
Not necessarily, actually. I think at least for the past year or something, a lot of projects I do have started with a very specific story or a specific books or something like that. But then eventually, as I work with it, other things occur.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense. And then I don't think I am. How can I say? I mean, maybe I'm searching more for magic in a way. You know, maybe I'm searching for something that can, like a spark or something. I mean, because a lot of the videos too, they don't have words. There are no lines, and so it's more of finding a mood. And finding also a way of playing with sound and movement put together. And
Is that to say that you don't necessarily see yourself as a storyteller?
Right. But I think I still haven't quite been able to, for example, take apart films completely. You know, if I see a Fellini film or something, it's still magic to me, even if I could try to cut it down into scenes and figure out how it's made.
That's interesting because, I mean, I've obviously seen a bit of your work, but to me, there's always a certain kind of rhythm to what you do. And you also operate within a certain color scheme.
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost like, I wouldn't say that you have a very strong sense of art aesthetic expression, because I think that sounds a bit limiting. It's more like you found a frequency. Mm-hmm. And from there, you adopt various mediums.
Yeah.
Would that be right? Like, do you feel?
Yeah,
that?
I mean, I was just thinking about also how, let's say in my mind maps, they might start with one story or something, but then they're intertwined with my own experiences and memories and other sources again. And I tend to expand things in that way.
You grew up in Norway. Do you have a sense, or do you feel close to a particular set of stories that you were told as a child? I mean, the Scandinavian countries, we do have a lot of folklore around. Mm-hmm. And there's obviously curriculum in school. We were educated to learn and read certain stories. Do you feel connected to that at all?
Completely. I mean, I think I was lucky to be around Scandinavian children's books, for example, Mumin or Lindgren. And I think some of those writers of children's stories from like 60s and 70s were great artists in themselves and decided to make vivid stories that are interesting both for adults and for children. And then I also was really into Roald Dahl, which I still am.
You should be. It's amazing, though. It's for everyone, young and old.
And
it's great.
Like, I'm still dreaming of making that crocodile dish for an opening.
Oh,
like a
please,
baguette
you must.
Filled with spinach and opened up with like a boiled egg for eyes and stuff like that.
That is good.
We had actually this fairy tale, or not fairy tale, but like we had a session each week for a while in elementary school where this one professor would actually tell stories of Norse mythology, which was really amazing. I mean, it's so complex. It has these characters like Loke and stuff like that, who's so complex and interesting. So, I used to love that stuff.
Yeah, and because you're from Norway and I'm from Sweden, to me at least, there's always a link and a connection to nature.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think that even though Oslo is a big city and so is Stockholm, these are still comparatively small cities.
Yeah.
So you're always quite close to nature and to feel all these characters within Nordic mythology is always very close to you.
Yeah, and also, I mean, even the fact that we had like outdoor stay on Wednesdays where we could just go out in the woods and like look at shapes in trees and space out and talk and bake bread on the fire.
Which is kind of magical, you know. I think I still believe it's magical.
Yes, me too.
It's
and there's
simple,
something
but it's
so
magical.
human about like looking at fire, telling a story, being in nature. Yeah.
So I was thinking about what you said earlier about making this film and it's magic to go out in nature and how it's a part of being human somehow to tell a story. But how do you then rehearse things? Do you do rehearsals? Or do you do... Previously, at one time, we've been talking about play, and that's what I'm trying to lead this conversation now.
Yeah.
To the aspect of rehearsal and therefrom... Do you play a lot to find all these characters within your narratives?
Yeah, I think the mind maps in themselves are one way of expanding things and allowing for connections to happen. And yeah, I think I just get into these modes of really obsessing over whatever it is that I will make a show about. And
That's
then
great.
I think I also allow myself to play happen in a lot of different mediums. Before I quite know how the next project will look like, I'm just making like huge paintings, and I want to fill a whole room with these huge paintings, just completely tapester it down. Yeah. I don't know.
And from there you can just stay in this room and have a look at all these paintings, and then something will happen.
Yeah, I'm kind of making a cave for myself these days.
I think that sounds great, actually.
It's funny because we talked about nature, but really I do really love artificial spaces too, you know. So, I mean, in the brain, we can completely encapsulate a world, and then I like that to be translated into videos and drawings and stuff like that too.
Yeah. It's all about the contrast, isn't it?
Even like the last show, which was about the Eglinton tournament that happened in 1839. It was basically reenactment of a jousting thing, where these aristocrats tried to pretend to be knights and fight each other. But then it started raining on the day of the tournament, and everything kind of collapsed. Also, Earl Eglinton was expecting 150 people to fight each other, and it ended up with 13. And even if 100,000 visitors came, it was kind of this grand fiasco. And I tried to capture this stuff in videos and drawings and things for the last show. Now I'm losing it a little bit. What was the question again? About containing spaces.
Yeah. So you did a reenactment of this Lord.
Oh, yeah.
Edlington?
Now I'm thinking. It was just funny because I did go physically to the place where this happened.
Mm-hmm.
And to see this Eglinton Castle now, I mean, youth go by and they smoke their cigarettes, and there's a tournament cafe that's a kind of terrible soup, and everything that I had been reading about collapsed a little bit by seeing the real place, because I'd imagined something completely different. And then I couldn't possibly capture what I had imagined while reading about this stuff by filming the actual place. So I had to translate what my imagination told me about the story into like a dinner party instead. So I staged people in this dinner party and had the main character move more and more inwards while his guests were dancing and things like that. So it's like the feeling I got from reading about the Eglinton tournament, I think, was better told through an abstraction of the event than by going physically to that place. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does, actually.
So there's something about like...
Did you feel a disappointment?
You know, I don't make documentaries. So like for me, it's more important to stay true to the excitement I get from reading something and to try to maintain that energy.
That makes so much sense.
Yeah.
Did you were you slightly disappointed when you arrived on site?
Not only that, but like, I actually thought I would make a great grand video in Scotland. But I didn't have all of my actors and stuff yet. So at one point I went to a rugby team place, and imagine like 40 horsemen, like really muscly, big guys, and me like screaming in front of them, being like, hey, please join my video project. I need only 13 of you to fight outside of this castle. And I had brought these huge bags of costumes that had been tailored and sewn, and I was so excited to make these grand videos. And then like nobody wanted to join. Like eventually I think I managed to get 2 clowns from the Fringe Festival in Edinburgh to do some medieval like fights outdoors, but like, it was really pathetic. I felt that I became Earl Eglinton in a sense, you know, with these grand visions of my big show, and then everything completely collapsed. And I actually didn't even dare to look at this material for months, and even decided to just completely just toss it and make a proper video with like a real team. Yeah.
So that's what happened, and that's what's on display at the moment. Yeah.
And that's what's on display. But then I actually ended up showing 3 of the short videos from Scotland, but just on iPad in the midst of a bunch of drawings in one of the venues. Because it's actually a show with 2 venues.
Oh yeah,
so
that's
the
good.
venue of this soft armor show has some videos, but it took me a while to manage to even dig into it and cut in it. Yeah.
Well, I guess it's all about letting go and daring to go back to things and learn from it. And